than the national statistics organizations. And I would say that's basically because politicians need lower numbers to get more votes, and charities need higher numbers to get more subsidies. So I think we need to find a way to bring that to a common ground, so that way we're solving the same problem. Otherwise, if we don't use the same data, we're definitely not solving the same problem.
What also is quite worrying is that the numbers are raising quite fast in the recent years. Why is that happening? Why are we seeing a rise in people not being able to afford or maintain a home in Europe?
I mean, I think there are various reasons. One, you look at obviously the increase of the cost of living. The salaries aren't catching up with the cost of living, so obviously there's a gap there. And when people can't pay for rent, then they end up living with their family members. Many times, the grandparents are using their pensions to provide support not only to their children but their grandchildren too. So you're looking at 3 generations being supported under one roof. Or you have couples that are together just because of economic reasons. Or you have people living with friends that probably are in overcrowded situations. So the main reason why people are homeless is because they can't afford rent. I mean, that's a very basic thing. From there, you have different types of homelessness. According to an EU framework on homelessness, you have about 12 types. So one of the things I think is important to understand, it's not just someone with mental health issues in the street. And I think because of press and what people receive as communication, that's what they believe it is. So I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to policy of getting the right communication out so it can be addressed. We're actually speaking with one of the top 10 law firms about creating a manual for the homeless population so they understand not only their rights, because the rights are promoted constantly in press and media, but also the obligations. And I think creating a stronger balance between the citizens understanding their rights and obligations will create a better result.
Your activism is based on your own experience as a person who has been homeless but has
Yes.
been able to get out of homelessness, to build your own independence, if I may say so.
Yeah.
How so I guess that I can say that you have a model how to get out of homelessness. You know
No, I would.
how to work yourself out of it. If
Yeah.
yes, what is that model?
Well, first of all, it's an empowerment-based model, right? I ran into all the obstacles that are created due to the assistance-based model. I couldn't go in at the time I was supposed to a homeless shelter. When they gave food, I was not going to tell a client, I can't work with you. I have to go wait to get food. So the system that's generated, in my personal opinion, as an organization too, it consolidates the lower caste system, if you will. And what we want to do is create a trampoline effect, right? So when someone hits rock bottom, they can bounce back up. So I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind. We have 3 main programs. We have a helpline. People call us from all over the world. We have amazing support from an organization called Fritz Kohle in Hamburg that helps support us with that as well. And really, the helpline creates a bi-directional conversation. As you probably know, normally helplines are one directional, right? But it's about creating a conversation, not just collecting data so we know, but how do we create live data? In Europe, for example, they have, it's called a recount in Spanish. Once a year, many countries count how many people are in the street. But as you can imagine, if I said, Christoph, how are you feeling today? You're like, great. Then I say, Christoph feels great in 2025, right? So there needs to be better beacons of information, if you will, for that. But the helpline is extremely important to identify resources that the homeless community are not aware of that exist to connect there. Then we have a Voices program where they tell their story and they put their face. So it's not about random stories. People are telling their story and connecting with our community, and that lowers the cost of ending homelessness. And then finally, the help program, which is for people that are willing and able to be active working citizens. And that's really where we can end homelessness and create examples for people to follow, right? Because ending homelessness for 1.3 million people is a lot to deal with. But if you can inspire those and create, if you will, verticals so people can understand, I can relate to this individual and this is how they did it. Now this is how I can do it. And one thing I'd add too is the extreme importance of networking opportunities, right? Because with the SDGs, 1 is no poverty, and 17 is reaching the goals through collaboration. And it's extremely important to understand collaboration is what lowers the cost for society, company, and government, so that way we can end homelessness in a much cheaper way.
So who should be more engaged? Who should see the opportunity for themselves? Politicians, by getting voters. Still, you say it's probably bigger, but concerning how big the European Union is,
Yeah.
and how small the voter pool among homeless people is, maybe it's not the politicians who should who would be the first one to focus. Maybe the broader society should have some motivation to
Yeah, well,
engage
you
with
have
this
to.
topic. But if
You,
yes, then why? What's the added value of uh, less
well,
people being homeless for the broader society?
well, one is the cost of society, because you have citizens that aren't contributing, right? They're not paying taxes.
While
Um,
they are homeless.
while they're homeless, where they do pay consumption taxes. So when they buy food and products, etc., they're paying taxes, but they're not receiving the benefits as a citizen many times. So I think people contributing is huge. I think it was something along the lines of like 930,000 euros of contribution over a 30-year span of somebody that's making 1,800 a month, right? So you have to keep in mind the value people can bring to society, and if they're not in the system, they're not contributing properly, but they're still there. So for politicians, you have to keep in mind too that even if the number of homeless people is smaller, they're all connected to the other people as well. So they
Mhm.
do represent a point. If you just look at tourism, look at a city. Do you want the first person getting off the port in Barcelona or flying into Brussels to see a homeless person at the airport, which is what I see when I go to Brussels? Before I even leave the airport, when I travel, is you run into homeless people. And that's not good for the image, and that's not good for society. And it's not an image issue, but it's a representation. So I would say that homelessness affects society as a whole. It is a mirror of where we're at, and it's something that needs to be solved. So politicians definitely need to think about it, because the growing trend of homelessness means it's going to affect more and more people. So if they're smart about it, they're going to prevent the issue from getting worse before it becomes so big that they really need to spend more resources. So it's actually cheaper to deal with now than it will be in the next 5, 10 years. So from an investment standpoint, I think politicians should do that. Companies, keep in mind, if you help someone in the worst moment of their life, they do something and they become something that most citizens that are younger don't do, which is be faithful and loyal to the companies that hire them, right?
Mhm.
The younger generation floats from one to another quite quickly. But if you help someone get out of the worst moment of their life through work or through products, even something, imagine a toothpaste company that helps them, they're going to be using that toothpaste for the rest of their life. So from a corporate perspective, you can create loyal clients from here to the end of their days, if you will. But also the fact that you have citizens that want, you have government, right? You have corporate, because also training them. IBM is a partner of ours, for example, and we're training through IBM Skills Build. So we have a commitment of upskilling 15,000 people through our programs. And from there, what we're doing, instead of teaching people how to sell candles in the street, what we're doing is we're teaching them how to use AI and focus on tools and solutions companies are willing to pay for. And that is a huge difference, because we're preparing for the future of work, which is what corporate needs. And then citizens, which also a basic aspect in NGOs is we're finding ways to come up with better solutions. A lot of NGOs have problems because they don't know how to generate wealth or resources. So they're dependent on the subsidies that change every year, every 4 years. So if they're able to generate more value with the work that they're doing, they're not going to have to beg for the beggars, if that makes sense.
That sounds actually amazing because you're empowering people to take their lives in their own hands. But that makes me wonder, how often do you meet homeless people who don't actually want to to take their lives in their own hands and get out of this state of their life?
Well, we always use the term willing and able, right? Willing because they're motivated, and able because they have the capacity to do so. Um, Unfortunately, you'll see people in the street and you'll realize that there's a very good chance they're not going to get out of their situation, right? Which is when you stop seeing them in the place they're at, it's not because they've changed locations, it's because they've died, right? And so one thing that we've learned, which was very challenging to really grasp, but is true, is you can either help people have a dignified life or a dignified death when you're doing the work that we're doing. And so for us, the assistance-based solutions is helping people have a dignified death. Make sure they have food, clothing, a roof over their head, but you're really not helping them find their maximum potential as an individual and as a collective group, right? And to help people become the best of who they are, you help them have a dignified life. We all have to die, but the process and how we live it is different. I'll give you an example. There was a guy named Juan. He was from Madrid. He was homeless in the streets for 21 years. It's a very long time. And he was in a wheelchair. He entered our program. We helped him get back on his feet, and he started making more money, and he was able to pay for rent. And we had this, it was a very beautiful project called Let's Fly Together. And it was with people that couldn't walk because they had polio. So the physical aspects of not being able to walk, with people that couldn't walk professionally. And he was also in a wheelchair. What we did in the airfield in Toledo, I believe it was, we taught them how to fly a glider, right? So he went from not being able to walk to be able to learn how to fly. And it was an amazing experience. Afterwards, we had lunch and he was interviewed by the press. And I found out later, he's like, well, after this, I can go. We said goodbye. We parted our ways that night. And I found out the next day when I got back to Barcelona that he passed away, which is terrible because you build relationships with people. And it was hard because you don't like to see anyone go. But the memory of him literally flying and happy and in that good space and moment on his last day is where we want to help people. We want people to end on a high note, wherever that is and whenever that is.
And you probably have more stories like this to tell, and they're all they seem to be the proof that your concept is working. So now, why do you think the approach that you're preaching cannot work for a government institution? Why is there a need for an activity like yours, and
Uh-huh.
why can't the government of probably any
It,
country across Europe take over
it
with
takes
better
takes time.
resources?
I would say it takes time. The biggest issue is getting into the budget of corporate and government, right? So when you look at
Governments have a better budget than you will ever be able to get from corporate.
but they have a system of how that budget works and where it's going, and it's gone in that direction for years, right? So you have a lot of organizations that you probably five that get 80% or more of the funding, right? So you have a few that get the majority of the funding, and that hasn't changed in a long time. So the challenge I think we have is not so much if it makes sense. The question is, how do we become part of the system so the budget recognizes the value without causing too much stress? Because everyone talks about, the status quo and breaking it. Well, that's great, but the reality is a lot of people depend on the status quo. So it takes time to convince people in charge of the budget, the voters, the companies, and everyone to understand that it's a better investment. So we have worked with city halls. We have been part of the alliance of the Spanish government for entrepreneurship. And we have presented in the Catalonian parliament where we were able to pass something regarding digital connectivity for the homeless community. We presented to the Senate of Spain and also the European Parliament. So it takes time, but it's really about changing the model of assistance to empowerment in a way that people on this side buy into our model. So that can happen two ways. One is it's slow, and the other time is when it speeds up. And unfortunately, the only time it really speeds up is through crisis. So COVID is when our model became faster and stronger because there was more of an urgent need to deal with it. So what happens is it takes longer for that to happen because it doesn't feel like it's close to home. But when you have something like the blackout that took place in Spain not too long ago, all of a sudden the entire nation felt homeless because they couldn't use their phone, and everybody was it was, I always say, like, the first day people had hope because their phone had battery, so they were waiting for it to come back. But like the next day when there would be no electricity, it would have lasted longer, then people would be frustrated, and day three they would be losing their mind. But you have 1.3 million people that are going through that situation on a daily basis at a
Well,
minimum.
let's go back to looking at the statistics for a moment.
Yeah,
The European Federation of National Organizations working with homeless
yeah,
has come up with Europe-wide data, and what I think is particularly interesting is that it is actually the rich countries, the leaders, the economic leaders of the European Union, such as France and Germany or
yeah.
Ireland, uh, that have the most rate of homelessness per their population. And then there's countries like Poland, which has even less less homeless people than Denmark, which is surprising. Why do you think do rich economies struggle more with providing people with homes than countries who are, the new Europe? They're still catching up with their economical situation.
Well, you have to keep in mind that the rich cities and countries, people attract poverty. It's a magnet, right? Because wealth. So how many people go to Vegas thinking they're going to get rich, right? So the question, even San Francisco. So what happens is you have these wealthier countries that promote what a wonderful place it is, what they're doing, amazing support. So obviously, if you're living in a poorer country and they don't have that system, you go there. So there's an expression that we hear sometimes from people from Latin America, which is, I'm poor, but I'm in Europe. Because
What does that
poor,
mean?
it means that they have a better system to receive support. So when they're poor in their country, they have absolutely nothing. But when they're poor here, they have a better support system. So, for example, a family that we're helping, two of them are actually in the program. They're living in a storage space, and they're like, yeah, it's obviously not ideal, and they recognize that they're in a homeless situation, but the outside surrounding once they leave that storage is 1,000 times better than where they were before. And so what happens is people think about homelessness just as like the space that you're sleeping in, but it's also the society that you're living in. So there are more resources, more opportunities, and there's also hope, which is what attracts people to another. This is also one of the reasons why we're doing the Great Walk this summer, which is more than 1 million steps for over 1 million homeless people. And we start in Linz, we go to Vienna, then we go to Bonn, to Munster in Germany, and then Amsterdam to Brussels, and then Bilbao and the Guggenheim to Madrid. And it's about creating awareness. It's about understanding best practices, studying the history of homelessness in those places with some amazing interns we're working with as well. And we have to understand why homelessness is what it is where it's at. And so you have to do constant research. And the most important thing is building relationships, right? So that way people can discuss it. Other times you'll have politicians explaining the reality of what they think the reality is. And that's
So
something
what?
that's important. And one other point, if you don't mind me mentioning, is we're doing a heat aid campaign in Vienna, Brussels, and Madrid, in which we're looking for partners and volunteers. But from there, 80% of the weather and climate related deaths in Europe are caused by heat.
How
And the
many? Could you repeat that?
80%, 80%, I'll give you the exact number here. You have, yeah, heat waves are responsible for more than 80% of deaths caused by weather and climate events in Europe. And this was quoted by Ine van de Kessel, who's a EU Environment Agency urban adaptation expert.
That means it's not the cold and freezing to death during cold winters in northern parts of Europe that
Heat,
is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a homeless person. It's heat. That's
heat.
surprising. I think that's going to be a surprising thing for many of our
And on
listeners.
top of it, they have the frozen. So when it's below zero, they have a policy that you have to take people off the street. Now, if it's above a certain amount, they should have a similar policy so that way they're taken off the street. Because if 80%, if heat waves are 80% of the deaths caused by weather and climate events in Europe, then why would they not have policy for that? And then I would go one step further, which is if you can have policy for heat and cold, what about the other parts of the year? And so I think policy tends to take time, slower to responding, but I think the trend should go towards, okay, we've taken care of when it's cold. Now we need to take care of when it's hot, and now we need to take care of the rest of the year.
So when will you be in Brussels with this walk, and what do you expect to achieve when coming to Brussels?
So we're going to be walking to Brussels, and with that, we're doing, like I said, more than 1 million steps, which is approximately 880 kilometers, so more than 20 marathons in 20 days. And we're going to walk towards the center of Brussels. We haven't specified the specific place yet, but we're also going to be doing the heat aid. So we're going to arrive to Brussels. We'll be meeting people there to raise awareness. And for 2 days, thanks to the support of Fritz Kohler, we're going to be providing water, promoting the telephone number, the helpline, and providing support with sunscreen, hats, and providing communication as well for the homeless community. Because it's not just about giving assistance. It's about, the assistance is a starting point. So what we're looking for is ways to connect with the homeless community with the basic needs, if you will, right, during heat, to help them understand how to get off the street. Right? That is the most important thing. We want to get the conversation going is, okay, X number of people are homeless there. Perfect. From them, how many people are willing and able to improve their situation on their own? And out of those, which people need support? So if people
Mhm.
aren't willing and able to, obviously you need a different solution. But those that are willing and able to, they need to make sure they have the right tools and resources too. So it's about debate, and it's about action, and it's about results.
One more data that is quite shocking for me is that over one third of the homeless population of Europe are kids, are children. Who's taking care of them?
In theory, governments, right? Because as orphans, you're homeless, and there are approximately one. This is interesting data for you. There are approximately 150 million homeless people around the world, and there are approximately 150 million orphans around the world. Now, if you consider that orphans are also homeless, you can see the numbers don't match, right? It's something to keep in mind. Even in Valencia, in Spain, there's an organization called Happy No Birthday. Because when they turn 18, the government no longer provides support and they become homeless in the street directly. So, to my understanding, in Europe, government is taking care of the orphans, the homeless children, right? From there, it's until 18. So they have to have a better structure, if you will, to make sure that people can make that transition from being an orphan in the system to leaving the system. So it's like when you come out of your home, when you have a family, but if you don't have the right support system, you end up in the streets, you end up in jail, you end up in many different places, but not in the place you need to be.
Mm, One of the topics that is very intensely discussed in Brussels is the European, not only in Brussels, also across the capitals, is the European migration policy. And since, as I was told, about a half of homeless people in Europe are migrants, where does this leave us with the the migration policy debate. What is not done well in how Europe handles migration from your from your perspectives?
Well, one thing is obviously international relations, right? Because people leave normally because they're in fear of their life, because they're trying to improve their situation. There are many extreme reasons, but I would argue people don't normally move because they want to. It's because they have to. So if you were with your family and you're in another country and you were being persecuted, you would leave the country. If you were living in a country that was at war, you would leave the country. There are many reasons why. So the question too is, how do countries help the other countries have a higher quality of life and standards, so that way people don't need to migrate to other countries? So one way is, I say, understanding how countries can work together so that where their citizens don't feel the need to migrate. That's one. The other thing is, when we talk about migration, I believe it's no longer existent in Spain, but the golden visa, right? Which was people would put 500,000 in to the country, buying property or whatever, and they would have a visa to live and work in that country. Now, poor people do the same. Let's call it the poverty visa. But what they have to do is they have to work in the black market for 2 or more years. So you have different ways of entry. Migration exists. The first thing is to define it properly so everybody understands what migration is, and then the desired results. So obviously, it's an issue that's going to cause challenges in Europe when you're inviting people to come. It's inbound marketing. So everyone talks about how great it is and how great the social system is in Europe. So obviously, if you're in a country that does not provide that security, you're going to go. From there, the question is, what's the relationship with the individuals and also the countries they're coming from to try to come up with better results. But it's when other people are dealing with extreme poverty, they'll go to extreme lengths to improve their lives, and Europe obviously is going to have to deal with it. So one way to deal with it is through education. We've dealt with many people that have come to Europe, and they probably have the bodies of a 28-year-old man, but they don't have basic education. So it's a generational issue. Like, how do you educate? You can educate them so far, if you will, but it really takes them having children to then the second generation of migrants to come here to integrate better in society, to understand how they can contribute. So we always say knowledge, recognition, and then change. So we have to have greater knowledge of migration, why it takes place and how it takes place, to recognize how we can create better results. And I think from a think tank perspective, we have to get people to understand what migration is. And why is it okay for someone to come in if they're wealthy, but if they're poor, it's not okay? So
Thank you.
I think.
Thank you. Closing question.
Yeah.
Which country in Europe would you say has the best policy, and why, in terms of handling poverty and the homelessness crisis?
I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I'll do it the best I can, because
If it exists, I mean.
I would say there's no perfect model. I think every country is doing the best that they can with the tools, knowledge, and resources that they have. We have to do better. The one that obviously stands out the most would be Finland. They do an amazing job with PR, because you'll read the only country to end homelessness is Finland, and then you read the lines that go on afterwards and explain the trend, the downward trend of how they're ending homelessness. So I would kindly invite them to not use clickbait when they promote the issue, but I do think focusing on housing.
So what do they do? They hide the problem, like, because this doesn't
You
sound like a
have
good benchmark.
urban design, right? So if you give homeless people the resources in a place where there's less traffic by everyday citizens, out of sight, out of mind. So I think they've done a wonderful job with the urban design of providing resources. And that's why you'll see a lot of resources are given in marginal areas, because they don't want to attract the traffic of where day-to-day movement is with citizens and tourism. So one thing is put it in places that you can't see it through urban design. The other thing is getting rid of it. So my honest opinion is Europe is doing a wonderful job providing assistance-based solutions. They're pushing for housing first, so everyone has a roof over their head. But a roof over your head doesn't mean that you're in a home.
I
Otherwise,
understand. We had that
that's
kind of approach in Poland back in the communist times, where you had basically no ways of support for people with disabilities. There was just no
yeah,
way for anyone with disabilities to walk around, and the propaganda was basically that we're such a healthy society that we don't have that we don't have people with disabilities because they just couldn't get out of their homes. Andrew, thank you very much for this inspiring and very insightful conversation. Andrew Funk, founder and president of Homeless Entrepreneur, was our guest today, and I hope to see you in Brussels one day.
we'll see you there, and thank you for highlighting homelessness. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.